The rain had started without warning, slicking the sidewalks and driving customers into the cozy upscale restaurant nestled in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Emily brushed damp strands of hair behind her ear as she cleared a table near the window, moving quickly but carefully, conscious of the time. Her shift was nearly over, but rent was due, and tips had been scarce all week. She was just finishing wiping down a table when the front door opened with a soft chime. In walked a tall man in a sleek gray suit, polished shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor, holding a large umbrella in one hand and guiding a wheelchair with the other. The boy in the wheelchair couldn't have been older than 8. His arms moved with effort, his legs tightly strapped to the seat. His eyes wandered the room with quiet curiosity, while the man guiding him, undeniably wealthy by his appearance, spoke into a Bluetooth earpiece in hushed but urgent tones. Emily instinctively stood straighter as the host led them to a corner booth. She offered a smile, but the man didn't return it, busy scrolling through messages on his phone while juggling his conversation. The boy, however, looked at her, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes. Hunger, not just for food, but for warmth. A few minutes passed, and no one came to feed the child. The man, Victor Langston, though she didn't recognize him yet, was immersed in what sounded like a high-stakes business deal, barely glancing at the menu. Emily approached gently, crouching beside the boy. "Hey, sweetheart, would you like some help with your food?" she asked softly, her voice warm, motherly. The boy didn't speak but gave a tiny nod, his hand twitching slightly in response. She tucked a napkin into his shirt and began feeding him bites of mashed potatoes, pausing between spoonfuls to make silly faces, trying to coax out a smile. To her delight, he giggled quietly, a sound so pure and fleeting that it caught Victor's attention across the table. Victor paused mid-call, eyes narrowing as he watched Emily feed his son. She was completely focused on the boy, not looking around for recognition or tips, not asking for anything in return. Her apron was stained, her hands were tired, but she was treating his son like he mattered more than anyone else in the world. Victor's gaze shifted from his son to the waitress, and for the first time in a very long time, something in his heart stirred, an emotion he couldn't immediately name. Victor stood just outside the kitchen doorway, watching her through the narrow rectangular window. Emily was leaning against a counter, sipping water and catching her breath between tables. Her back was turned, but there was something calm, even tender, about the way she stood there, completely unaware that the richest man in the room had been watching her every move. He pushed the door open quietly and stepped in, his presence immediately noticeable. The bustle of the kitchen slowed slightly as chefs and line cooks stole glances his way. Emily turned, startled to find the sharply dressed man standing just a few feet away. She quickly set down her cup, wiping her hands on her apron, assuming something had gone wrong with the order. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, maintaining her usual polite tone. Victor's eyes met hers, steel meeting warmth. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Emily blinked. "Do what?" He motioned toward the dining room with a small nod. "Feed my son." The question hung in the air like an accusation, but Emily didn't flinch. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw behind the expensive suit and polished watch a man who wasn't used to being challenged. She could tell he wasn't angry, confused, maybe, but not angry. "He was hungry," she said softly. "And you were busy." Victor folded his arms. "So you just step in. You don't even know him." "I didn't need to," she replied. He needed help. That was enough. He stared at her, unmoving, like he was trying to figure out whether she was genuine or just putting on a show. But her eyes didn't waver, and her posture didn't shift. She wasn't asking for approval. She was just telling the truth. "Do you always do that?" he asked after a long pause. "Help people?" She hesitated, a small, tired smile appearing at the corner of her mouth. "Not always. Just when it matters." There was something about her honesty, the quiet way she held her ground, that unsettled him more than any business meeting or financial risk ever had. He was used to being feared, admired, or resented, but rarely spoken to with simple decency. Victor glanced around the kitchen, then nodded to himself more than to her. Without saying anything more, he turned and walked out. The head chef, who had overheard everything, leaned closer to Emily. "Do you know who that was?" She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Victor Langston," the chef whispered. "Langston Industries. He's worth billions." Emily raised her eyebrows, genuinely surprised, but not in awe. "I just saw a little boy who needed kindness," she said quietly, before heading back out to take her next table. The morning sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Emily's small apartment, casting soft patterns on the walls. She lay still for a moment, the weight of yesterday's double shift still pressing on her shoulders. The quiet was a rare comfort. Her daughter, Lily, was still asleep in the other room, curled up beneath the threadbare pink blanket she adored. Emily stretched, wincing slightly from the ache in her lower back, and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Just another day, she thought, another long day of working for too little and worrying about too much. A loud knock shattered the silence. Emily froze, alarmed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her rent was only 3 days late. Not enough time for the landlord to send someone pounding on her door like that. She hurried into the hallway, tying her robe tighter around her waist. Another knock came, firmer this time. When she opened the door, a sharply dressed man in a dark suit stood in front of her. He held a sleek black envelope in his hand, the kind that looked completely out of place in her worn-down building. Behind him, a luxury black car idled at the curb, glinting in the morning sun. "Miss Emily Hart?" he asked. "Yes," she said slowly, heart pounding. "I'm with the Langston Foundation. Mr. Langston asked me to deliver this personally." He handed her the envelope, gave a small nod, and turned to leave without another word. Emily stood frozen in her doorway, envelope in hand, too stunned to call after him. She stepped back inside, closed the door, and stared at it. Slowly, she opened the flap and pulled out a thick stack of papers, and a typed letter on heavy cream-colored paper. Her eyes scanned the contents, disbelieving. It wasn't just a thank-you note. It was a full scholarship for Lily to attend one of the city's best private schools, tuition paid in full. There was also a 5-year lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, rent completely covered. And lastly, a job offer, an official position to manage a new community center being built under the Langston Foundation's latest initiative, a center designed for children with disabilities and their families. Emily sat down slowly on the couch, the papers trembling in her hands. Her mouth fell open, but no words came out. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Suddenly, a soft honk echoed from outside. She looked through the window and saw the luxury car still waiting. The back door opened, and there he was. Victor Langston stepped out, no suit jacket this time, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and a calm, almost uncertain expression on his face. Emily walked out to meet him, the letter still clutched in her hand. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, eyes wide with disbelief. Victor looked at her and, for the first time, his voice held no businesslike coldness. "Yes, I did," he said. "You did more for my son in 5 minutes than I have in years. I've built companies and bought buildings, but what you gave him was something I've never been able to give: comfort, joy, connection." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I don't just want to thank you," he added. "I want you to be part of his life. And part of something bigger. This center, this job, it's not charity. It's your calling." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as Lily peeked through the curtains upstairs, watching the scene below without understanding what was happening. Emily looked at Victor, and for the first time in her life, she felt like the world might finally be turning in her favor. 6 months had passed, and the transformation was almost too incredible to believe. Where once there had been an abandoned lot full of cracked concrete and weeds, now stood the gleaming Langston Community Center, a warm, inviting space filled with sunlight, laughter, and the steady hum of hope. Inside, walls were lined with colorful murals painted by children and local artists. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the distant smell of baked goods from the cafe tucked in the corner of the building. Wheelchairs and walkers moved easily along wide hallways, and the sound of music drifted from a therapy room where kids were singing along to a guitar. Emily stood near the welcome desk, dressed in a crisp blazer, clipboard in hand, her smile easy and radiant. She moved through the building with the confidence of someone who belonged, not as a guest, not as an employee, but as a leader. She paused by one of the playrooms where her daughter, Lily, was helping a smaller child with a puzzle. Across the room, Eli, Victor's son, beamed from his wheelchair as Emily made her way toward him. "Ready for your art class, Mr. Langston?" she teased gently. Eli giggled and held out his hand. Without hesitation, Emily scooped him up into a soft hug before placing him carefully in a mobility chair designed for the art studio. His speech had improved, his posture was stronger, and most importantly, his eyes sparkled with a kind of light that hadn't been there before. The shy, quiet boy who had once sat silently at a restaurant table now thrived in a place designed to celebrate every part of him. Victor stood nearby, watching the scene from a short distance. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore jeans, a soft gray sweater, and a quiet expression filled with awe. He'd been coming to the center every day, not as a billionaire investor, but as a father learning how to be present. He had begun attending therapy sessions with Eli, volunteering for workshops, even reading books about parenting disabled children. He still didn't always know what to say, but he had learned that sometimes showing up mattered more than saying the perfect thing. A young journalist from a local paper approached him, notebook in hand, clearly nervous. "Mr. Langston, everyone's been wondering. What inspired all this? You've built 100 things across this city, why this center? Why now?" Victor didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked across the room to where Emily knelt beside Eli, patiently helping him adjust the grip on a paintbrush. Eli was beaming. Emily's face was lit with kindness and quiet joy. Just like it had been that rainy afternoon months ago. "Because someone reminded me what love looks like," Victor finally said, voice low and full. "I've spent my whole life chasing success. But she showed me something success never gave me: connection, purpose, redemption." The journalist blinked, surprised by the vulnerability in his tone. Victor looked around at the children playing, the parents chatting, the volunteers laughing with kids. He took a deep breath. "This place, it's not a monument to wealth," he said. "It's a thank you. To the waitress who saw my son as a child, not a burden. To the woman who reminded me that the most important things in life can't be bought, they must be nurtured." He excused himself politely and walked across the room toward Emily and Eli. As he reached them, Eli reached out his hand, not to his father, but to both of them, linking them together. And for the first time, they all stood there not as a billionaire and a waitress, not as a CEO and an employee, but as a family born not of blood, but of choice, compassion, and second chances.